Hello ladies and gentlemen, and movie lovers of all kind, and welcome back to the channel. As always, I am your host, Brett Murphy, and for today's video, I have a brand new tier list / ranking video for you all, and I am going to be ranking every single MCU movie and show. With the release of The Marvels and the conclusion of Loki Season 2, that brings us to a grand total of 44 different projects in the MCU. So whether you're still along for the ride or not, because let's admit it, many people have jumped off at this point, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video, which I promise includes plenty of hot takes. So yes, it is a tier list video, and you'll see me talking a lot, moving movies and shows around between different tiers, but my ranking will be at the very end after the tier list has been completed. And a friendly reminder before we actually get into it, as I'm sure I'll probably repeat it again soon, this list is completely subjective. It is my own personal takes. It's not like a master list or a definitive list or based on rankings or box office numbers or anything at all. Just my own personal list. And so without further ado, let's hop on over to the computer. Alrighty folks, as you can now see, our tier list is up in front of us, and as per usual, I like to go through my tiers just because they're named a bit differently from the norm, just to make them a little more me, so it's not like S, A, B, C, D, and so on. Instead, replacing the S tier is godlike, under that is awesome sauce, then good is gold, quite alright, super meh, and at the very bottom in that traditional F tier is rock bottom. And when it comes to the MCU, I always like to reiterate this a second, third, fourth, fifth time, that this list is 110% subjective. It is my own personal thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and opinions. It is not based off, like, this isn't the definitive ranking. This isn't based off of audience or critic scores. It's not based on anything but what I think and what I feel and how I perceive these individual movies and shows. So, with that out of the way, we're starting off with the Incredible Hulk. Okay, I think for the most part this is in order, but not all of it is, clearly, because the MCU didn't start with the Incredible Hulk. So the Incredible Hulk, I think I'm going to put in, possibly a bit controversially, I'm actually going to put the Incredible Hulk in quite alright. For me personally, I don't hate this movie. I see why some people just like completely disregard it, because it's really not a part of the larger MCU. Like, yes, we've had some of the characters come back in various forms over the years, and they try to tie the events back to the larger MCU, but it feels so disconnected when you go and watch it. Even with the Robert Downey Jr. post-credit scene and whatnot, it still feels so disconnected. But that being said, I do appreciate this movie's greater focus on Bruce Banner the Man rather than just the straight-up Hulk stuff. But when the straight-up Hulk stuff does hit, it's actually pretty awesome. Like, I love the stuff that goes on at the university or college or whatever it is with fighting the military, and I love that final fight. Some people now like to look back on it and say it's like a muddy, muddled CGI mess. For me, I have fond memories with it. I remember seeing it in theaters when this movie was brand new, and anytime I rewatch The Incredible Hulk now, because I do every so often, I like to just crank my subwoofer and hear those thuds when these two are throwing down. Those are the positives for the movie. Everything else is a negative. Aside from General Ross, I think William Hurt, R.I.P. to the legend, was a phenomenal casting choice there. Everything else is just meh. Edward Norton kind of feels like he's phoning it in a little bit. Liv Tyler is just a barely there character, and the story is just so familiar and thus quite forgettable. The first Iron Man, you already know it's going into that godlike tier. There will probably be a fair few movies in that godlike tier. Aside from this being the one that started everything, that kicked off the MCU, it's still just a damn good movie. Robert Downey Jr. was born to play the role of Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, and this was arguably the biggest career resurgence of all time. I love Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane, one of my personal favorite MCU villains. I love the mixture of practical effects and flawless CGI effects in here as well. The movie is just a perfect blend of pretty much everything. Doesn't have a few flaws, yes, but none of them are even remotely near fatal. The flaws are very minor in my opinion, and the MCU's first is still among its very, very best. Now we'll move on to Iron Man 2, And yeah, this one is a tough one to place, and I'm bouncing around between a few different spots, but I'll put it in quite alright because I do have a fair bit of nostalgia for Iron Man 2. I do enjoy going back to watch this one myself personally. You can easily address all of this movie's flaws right up front. The biggest glaring one is Mickey Rourke, who couldn't be possibly phoning it in any more than this. You can tell he doesn't care, he doesn't buy the script, he's not invested in the character, he mumbles and grumbles through his lines. But that being said, again, you still have RDJ as Tony Stark. I like the journey that he goes on in this one myself personally. I like that you kind of see more of that connection with his father. Don Cheadle replacing Terrence Howard, I know that was a big thing back in the day, but it was one of the best decisions that they've made. No discredit whatsoever to Terrence Howard, who is an unbelievable actor, but Don Cheadle is just better suited for this role, and I found had much better, and well, for a long time continued to have much better chemistry with Robert Downey Jr. And we also got Sam Rockwell as Justin Hammer, who we're still awaiting a triumphant return there, but you can't hate Sam Rockwell. The guy is freaking awesome in everything he does, and he just seems like such a wholesome human being too on the side. So this movie has some fun action sequences. It was also our introduction to Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow. For every fault and flaw that it has, and every crack that seems to reveal itself more and more as the years go on, I find myself feeling very nostalgic for this movie at the same time. There are many elements that I really do enjoy. This one might get me in some trouble, and I know it definitely gets me in some trouble when it comes to friends, in particular from the Cinemania podcast. There's a lot of Thor lovers in there, and I just personally am not one of them. I like elements of this movie. I think all the pieces are there, but the movie is just so boring, and to me, it was a mind-blowing bag fumble, like just such a huge mistake to put Thor for the majority of the movie in this like small town rural setting. It's so bland, it's so dull, it's the typical fish out of water story, some cheap laughs here and there, but the best stuff is by far with the Asgardians in Asgard. I love Kenneth Branagh's direction here. I love the way that Asgard looks. It is so full of life, it is so vibrant. There is very clearly such a rich history there worth exploring. Chris Hemsworth, of course, the perfect casting choice for Thor, as he continues to carry that mantle. Loki, Tom Hiddleston, still going forward with that. Loki Season 2 just wrapped up, and you'll see that one later in this video. I love Anthony Hopkins as Odin. Natalie Portman, also amazing in everything she does, and it's no different here. Jane Foster, more of a typical, stereotypical character you kind of see with like the MCU love interest, but for the most part, she plays it very well. But yeah, the movie is just dull, and aside from like the flashy direction and the great cast, you just don't get to spend anywhere near enough time in Asgard, learning about Asgard. I would have preferred a straight Thor movie that just had that stuff. So not what we ended up getting in the end, nothing we can do about it now, but yeah, for me, super meh is where it ends up, and a lot of people are going to disagree with that, but hey, it's my list. Now we're moving into the awesome sauce category for the very first time with the first Avenger, Captain America, the first Avenger, not Captain Marvel. Me personally, seeing how this is my list, I adore Captain America, the first Avenger. It remains in, I think, my top 15 or so of the MCU. Look, I'm just a big sucker for World War II movies, first and foremost. I'm a big sucker for Chris Evans, and I love the tone of this movie. It is the perfect blend of, like, serious World War II action extravaganza, but then also just a great character study, and has a bunch of just fun, campy goodness woven throughout here too. Like, this is arguably the MCU movie that is the closestly tied, I'm not sure that's even proper wordage, but anyway, it's the most closely tied to its comic book roots. I love Hugo Weaving as Red Skull. I wish we got much more of him, and really, I have so much fun with this movie. Again, it's one of those MCU movies where I recognize the flaws, but for me, I love it so much that I just completely ignore them. Like, the flaws here mean absolutely nothing to me. Captain America, the First Avenger remains one of my favorite MCU flicks. Now we're moving into the original Avengers movie, and Some people seem to have turned on this one and say how poorly it's aged in recent years, but I just don't see it. Maybe it's because this movie for the longest time was like my favorite movie of all time. It was my favorite theater going experience for a very, very long time. I still have the memories etched in my brain, engraved in my mind for as long as I can keep them, of just seeing this movie opening night, seeing that spinning shot for the first time. I know there's a lot of controversy with like Joss Whedon, and there's a lot of people again that look back on this and say like, oh yeah, this looks bad, that looks bad, this is super corny, this is super stupid. But for me, it was the perfect culmination of everything that had happened up until that point, and I still revisit this movie usually like at least once a year, if not more, and it still very firmly holds on to that 10 out of 10 rating for me. Iron Man 3, another one that's going to be a bit controversial because it's going in the awesome sauce category, and I have absolutely no regrets. Never understood the hate for this one. I understood why some people were upset with the Mandarin twist, but I actually, as someone who hadn't really been super well versed in the comics at that point, we're going back a decade now, which is mind-blowing to me. I can't even believe the word that just came out of my mouth. But I loved it, how it was set up to be like he was the big villain, but really he was just the puppet, and the real one holding the strings was Aldrich Killian. I love everything about the Extremis project. We get more Don Cheadle as War Machine. We get a ton of Iron Man suits in that epic final fight. Pepper gets more involved than ever. I loved Guy Pearce as the villain here too. So for me, this movie did pretty much everything right. Plus, I also see it as a Christmas movie. I like to watch it every year around Christmas time. So aside from a few things here and there that don't always land, I really, really liked Shane Black's direction for this movie. I liked the handling of Tony's PTSD, and the vast majority of the comedy worked for me. Not quite hitting that godlike tier, but believe me when I say it does come pretty damn close. Next up is everybody's favorite Thor: The Dark World, and another controversial hot take coming your way. Not actually. But it's also not going in rock bottom, and here's why. I don't think it's the rock bottom of the MCU. Now, for the longest time, I was saying that I didn't dislike any project in the MCU, and for the longest time, that was true, but now there are projects in the MCU that have come out just fairly recently that I actually do actively dislike, and those will end up in rock bottom. For me, the rock bottom is reserved for a case-by-case basis on what I feel is the rock bottom of whatever tier list I may be doing. In this case, it's the MCU, so only the projects that I consider to be the rock bottom of the MCU will end up down there, and Thor: The Dark World, though it will end up towards the very back end of my ranking, I don't think belongs in that rock bottom tier. Hear me out. It does have its positives. The Dark Elves are super interesting. I love their design. I wish we did get a heck of a lot more of them, but really, aside from them just looking really cool, the thing that really carries this movie for me is the bond and the relationship and the way things progress and move between Hemsworth's Thor and Hiddleston's Loki. That dynamic is really the driving force behind this movie. That's the stuff that I really enjoy. I like the Dark Elves. I like that there's a ton of lore there. No, it does not get explored anywhere near enough, and no, Malekith is not even a remotely passable villain. It's a pitiful excuse for a villain, but I also did find that the death of Thor and Loki's mother to be a very prominent point in both characters' stories, as it does get referred back to many times, all the way up even until Endgame. So despite how not great it is, because it's a very dull, very dark, very drab, dreary movie, I do think it has some redeeming qualities that pull it out of that rock bottom tier, at least now. It would have been rock bottom had I had done this like a year and a half ago, but where we are today, it isn't going in rock bottom for me. Captain America: The Winter Soldier, of course, is going in godlike. It is one of my all-time favorite, like, spy thriller espionage movies, not just as a superhero movie or a comic book movie, but this is just straight up a damn good movie, and it deserves every bit of praise that it has gotten over the years. Now we're going to Guardians of the Galaxy, and that too is inching its way up into godlike. This was James Gunn's first big project, his first foray into superhero and comic book movies, and it couldn't have been done any better. This movie took a band of relatively unknown characters, unless you were super into comic books, and made them just global icons. You'd be hard-pressed to find almost anyone that didn't know at least one, if not all, of these characters. The movie is fun, it is colorful, it made you laugh, it made you cry, it showcased James Gunn's beautifully chaotic style in all of its glory, and this is, again, up there for among my all-time favorite movies just in general. I love the first Guardians movie. Age of Ultron could be a hot take, awesome sauce. This one, I think just recently, and again, my ranking will be revealed at the end, just very recently got bumped out of my top 10, but I really, really like Age of Ultron, and I don't get why everyone doesn't like it. Like, there are so many people out there that just shit all over Age of Ultron, and I just don't understand it. Aside from maybe, like, the Quicksilver stuff, and the fact that the movie is very, like, colorless for some reason, like coming off of the first Avengers movie to this one, like there's a very apparent lack of color, but I love James Spader's Ultron. His plan is a little bit weird, a little bit goofy, but so much of this movie works for me. It sets up beautifully for what's to come next with Civil War and such. Again, Spader's villain, I absolutely adore Ultron. I really wish he did come back in some capacity, and it was also our introduction to Scarlet Witch, so yeah, and I definitely have to address the elephant in the room of that, like, Black Widow-Hulk relationship thing. That was odd, for sure, but for me, there's just so much of this movie that really works and always has worked and continues to work. The first Ant-Man movie will, I think, be the first in that good as gold category. The first Ant-Man movie is just perfectly okay, if you ask me. Like, it's not quite meh enough to end up in quite alright or super meh, but it's not good enough to end up in awesome sauce, or definitely not godlike. It's a fun, self-contained little heist movie. It does take a lot of beats from the first Iron Man movie, but it's the cast and the camaraderie between the cast, the chemistry of the cast that drive this movie. I'm saying the cast a lot because I lean so heavily on them for my enjoyment of this movie. It is their dynamic, it is their chemistry, it is the jokes. All of that is what makes me really, really enjoy my rewatches of Ant-Man, especially Paul Rudd, because duh. And I love Ant-Man's powers. I think they used that very, very well. I think they played to the character's strengths, and I think the way that they portrayed the powers was executed flawlessly. But everything else, been there, done that. We've seen a lot of stuff that was just so similar to this. Alright, he just had to move us around a little bit there. We've hit Captain America Civil War, and boom. Godlike. Look, minor spoiler alert for the end of the video when we do hit the ranking, but for a good few years, Captain America Civil War was my favorite MCU movie. Not gonna spoil where it is now, that we've had quite a few projects since then, but for a good while, Civil War was my favorite movie. Yes, it is pretty much just Avengers 2.5 or 2.5 or whatever you want to call it, but to me, I was perfectly okay with it. There was still so much in here that was deeply rooted in Captain America and Bucky's stories that it still felt like a Captain America movie, while also having a lot with the other characters that, again, just bled beautifully and just so wonderfully and magnificently into the events of Infinity War. You could tell that all of this was carefully mapped out and it was executed just superbly. And for me, what I love the most about this movie, and what I've always loved most about this movie, is the fact that it puts you into the shoes of the civilians. It puts you into the crowd. It shows you security cam footage. It shows you cell phone footage. It shows you the true destruction and toll that the Avengers have on the world they're trying to save, and that's something that none of the other movies have really, really been able to capture. Again, Endgame a little bit with the blip and stuff like that, but no one really honed in on that topic and explored it as well as Civil War did, on top of having just stunning action, great big spectacle moments, deep personal character moments. It just hit every beat it needed to, in my opinion, and I've always loved Civil War, and I continue to love Civil War. The first Doctor Strange will also join Ant-Man in Good as Gold as that, like, perfectly fine, enjoyable little, almost one-off feeling adventure, because it was really just our introduction to Doctor Strange. It was kind of your traditional origin story. Like, we met the person he was before, inciting incident happens, we see his journey, and by the end, he's a hero. It's very typical. I think Mads Mikkelsen could have been used so much better as the villain in this movie, and then Dormammu is just a giant floating space head. So I love the mystic arts in here. I love the way all of that is portrayed. I love it. Has some of the most fun and dynamic, exciting, and inventive fight sequences in the entire MCU, with its very, like, it seems like it's taking a lot of inspiration from, like, Inception and other movies similar to that, and that's not a bad thing because it led to a lot of really cool, just mind-bending visuals that I always go back and enjoy, but it's lacking a lot of that oomph. It didn't really give me anything new, and it was very, very severely lacking in the villain department. Guardians 2 has grown on me with the release of Guardians 3. I look back on it now because there are so many beats, especially in James Gunn's work, that just continue to carry forward, and they just matter so much more with each movie that he adds. And that's what happened with me in Guardians 2. So after I saw Guardians 2 for the first time, I was like, yeah, it was good, it was fun, but like, whatever. But now that I've watched it many times since then, I've grown to really admire its character work a lot more. So yes, it does have the colorful visuals and the potty humor and things like that that'll make the kids chuckle, and some of that stuff is a little cringy, is a little offbeat, and doesn't always work, but it's the character work in here that won me over and that continued to make me more and more of a fan of this movie over time. And now that we have Guardians 3 as well, and it tied so many other things back together to make the Guardians trilogy, I would argue, one of the best movie trilogies of all time. I still do feel like Volume 2 is by far the weakest of the three, but it doesn't change the fact that my appreciation for it just continues to grow and grow. So yes, it is in the good as gold tier, but it's like right on the bridge of like the awesome sauce and good as gold tiers. Homecoming, also just going to end up in that tier because I felt this movie, despite how much of it really worked for me, it played it very safe. It was just kind of a traditional, easygoing Spider-Man movie. It played it a bit too small scale for me, and maybe that's because I expected more. You know, I grew up on the Raimi trilogy. The first Spider-Man movie was the first movie I remember seeing on the big screen, so I hold Spider-Man as a character up in very high regard. One of my two all-time favorite superheroes is what I'm trying to say here. So the fact that it was just, they really played up that friendly neighborhood side of Spider-Man, I didn't always love. I like when Spidey is swinging around through New York and saving people from collapsing buildings and doing all these big, larger-than-life things. That's the Spider-Man that I really resonate with. So while I do commend them for taking a crack at really going in on that friendly neighborhood side of things, it just didn't always work for me. Elements that did work, I love Holland in the role. I think they used Robert Downey Jr. very well in this movie. I think they used him very tastefully. He was plastered all over the marketing, but he wasn't actually in the movie that much. And Michael Keaton's Vulture is one of the best villains in the MCU, hands down. So I do think the story played it a little safe, and I do wish that they went a bit bigger with the scale, and that's why it ends up being down in that kind of just good as gold tier, where it's like perfectly fun, fine, serviceable superhero action. Ragnarok, this one might get me in trouble. Godlike. I love this movie so very much. Potentially the funniest of the MCU movies, or at least the movie that I laughed the hardest in. This is where Thor's character did a complete 180 and changed and stopped being that like stoic and just kind of emotionless, sometimes a little bit funny, and just very typical, playing up that Asgardian roots. Those Asgardian roots, I should say, and instead took this turn to this kind of like more fun character. Yes, he did get to be a bit of a big dum-dum, but in between there, and that's something I think that for the most part Taika does really well with most of his work, he also, like, he made sure to weave in many very good character moments, many moments of emotion, like with the passing of Odin, the stuff with Loki, and that, you know, Asgard isn't a place, it's a people, and that stuff. So there are a lot of things in here that really bring this just otherworldly story back down to earth and make it feel very grounded. And I really loved this turn for Thor. I think this is the best. This or Infinity War were the best versions of Thor, in my opinion, because he's still a complete badass. He is still the God of Thunder. He has that huge moment. You have Hela in here, who is probably a top 3 MCU villain. And I actually think that this was really like the best blend of where Hulk is now and where Hulk started out. And it also gave us Valkyrie too, who continues to be a big player and a mainstay in the MCU to this very day. The first Black Panther will go in awesome sauce. You would ask me a couple years ago and I would have put it in good as gold, and that is not to do with Chadwick Boseman's passing, R.I.P. King. I love Chadwick, always have, always rooted for the guy. The first time I saw him was in the movie 42, and he is still exceptional in that, and he is exceptional here. Also, Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan, played brilliantly by Michael B. Jordan, is a top 3 to 5 MCU villain. I love the world of Wakanda. Ryan Coogler's direction is, I would say, borderline unmatched in the industry today. The guy, he works wonders with every project he gets his hands on. This movie, to me, it felt like a just very run-of-the-mill superhero flick when I first saw it. I didn't see all the appeal, but looking back on it, I think it's because people were hyping it up so much that I went in with such high expectations, and I left being like, yeah, it was good, but like, what was so special about it? But as I've watched it over and over again throughout the years, I have come to see more and more what is so special about the first Black Panther. Infinity War, duh. I don't have to get into it here. Infinity War is crazy to me because the Russo bros and Kevin Feige and the Marvel execs and writers and everyone, they somehow managed to give us 2 perfect finales in back-to-back Avengers movies. Like, Infinity War acted as this big culmination of a decade's worth of work. We had all the heroes coming together. I loved the groupings. You had the people, the team in Wakanda. You had the team on Titan. This was very much so a Thanos movie, and that was a brilliant, just a truly game-changing choice to make Thanos, like, really, really the centerpiece of this story. Visually, it's stunning. The story is captivating. The action is phenomenal, like, just truly fantastic stuff here. And then that ending is one of the most jaw-dropping, arguably one of the most iconic movie endings, I would say now, 6 years later, like, of all time. Like, there was audible gasps and then just dead silence. Like, I've never been in a theater that has been more silent in my life than in the moment when the snap happens. So for that, I'll never forget my experience with Infinity War. And then Endgame followed that up again by giving us another, like, for many people, Endgame was the end of the MCU. Before the MCU hit where it is now, 4 years, almost 5 years removed from Endgame, people were just like, the MCU can continue, but it's going to continue without me. Endgame was the cutoff point for many people. And if that is where you stopped, I'm not going to say you got out at the right time, because I'm still enjoying most of the projects coming out now, but if you stopped here, that is perfectly fine, because that was the end of so many important journeys. That was the culmination of, what was it at that point, 11 years worth of work. It ended every character arc, or at least the important ones that it did tie off there, it ended them in just such a bittersweet, and again, I'm saying perfect a lot, but it really truly did feel like a perfect finale, a perfect conclusion. So if you did stop there, that's fine, and if you kept going, you can look back on Endgame like I do and just still, like, revel in the fact that this movie happened and it was as good as it was, and how it took the world by storm, and how they did it. They pulled it off somehow. The crazy bastards, they did it with Endgame. It worked. Moving now to Far From Home. Also going to end up in that good as gold tier. Exact same beats that I said for Homecoming. I appreciated that they took Spider-Man out of New York for the first time, plopped him in Europe somewhere. I can't even remember where he was. Different parts of Europe. Loved Mysterio. Jake Gyllenhaal, top tier MCU villain. But again, the story just felt like it played it safe. It didn't surprise me. You knew the Mysterio twist was coming from a mile away. I don't buy any of the drone technology, even in the MCU, as crazy as it had gotten at that point. the drone stuff just didn't work for me, and the final big like conclusion, it just feels like a goofy CGI mess. So there are a lot of really good things in here, but then there's also a lot of meh things too. Although I did love the ending. I love that end credit scene. All of that stuff really worked. Ant-Man and the Wasp, I'm going to put down the quite all right. I think it's almost just as good as the first Ant-Man movie, but it suffers from an even worse or bigger lack of villains. At least in the first one, you had Corey Stoll, Yellow Jacket, and he had the suit and stuff like that, and the suit's design was pretty cool, but in this one, like, they waste Walton Goggins. Ghost had a really cool idea, but they just did not use her effectively whatsoever. Lawrence Fishburne gets, like, barely any screen time, then all of a sudden he's a villain. Just so much didn't work here. I loved that they had Evangeline Lilly like finally take center stage. I think a lot of that worked. Again, it goes back to the cast. A lot of the casting stuff, that's what really worked for me in this movie, but everything else I find sort of suffers and falls back into the wayside behind this just crazy good cast with just impeccable chemistry. Captain Marvel, super meh. I don't really have to go on about this one. It's not Brie Larson's fault at all. In fact, I think Brie Larson is by far the best part of this movie. I think that she was a fantastic choice to play the character, and I really do love her in the role, and people often forget that she is a truly marvelous actress. But the movie, for me, it's just so generic. It is so painfully dull, so painfully generic. The villain sucks. Like, bottom tier villain with Jude Law and then the Supreme Intelligence or whatever. Terrible villains, generic storytelling. I like the 90s throwback stuff. I like the de-aging on Sam Jackson is like, I don't even know how they pulled it off. And I liked the Skrull stuff. Like, I liked Ben Mendelsohn's Talos in here and such. So there are elements of the movie that I do like, but I never revisit this movie because I find it to just simply be a bore. Moving into WandaVision is potentially, we'll see, I'm actually going to unravel this in my own brain as I do my ranking at the end, but WandaVision may very well be the best MCU series we have gotten so far. It was so weird, it was so unique, so creative, so out there, and to this day they still haven't been able to match its weirdness and how just truly out there it was. It really did change my perspective on where the MCU is going to take things. Where they took it after this might not have necessarily satisfied everyone at this point, myself included, but this was the kicking off point to what was to come with the multiverse saga, and I think when I look back on this show, I look back on it with very fond memories. I look back on it with all the theories and the speculation in between each episode, even though not everything necessarily paid off, and it does have an extremely underwhelming and incredibly goofy-ass finale. I think everything leading up to the finale is just, it's some of the MCU's best, most risk-taking work. I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but they took risks with this show, and I love that and I admire that, and I think for the most part they really did pay off. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, unfortunately, yeah, it kind of just does fall into that, like, very colorless, very bland, and what really carries the movie is the stuff between Bucky and Sam, what happens with the mantle of Captain America. This one actually has one of the better finales of the MCU series, in my opinion, and I love this stuff with, like, Isaiah Bradley and all that, so there are elements in here that I really like. There's some very powerful scenes, some very strong messages. I like that it showed that these superheroes, like, for the most part, they're not all Tony Stark. Like, they don't all get these, they don't live these big privileged lives outside of being superheroes. Like, they do it because they can, they do it because no one else will. So seeing Sam Wilson and his family struggle and not being able to, like, get alone and everything, even though they know he is, like, the Falcon and stuff like that, I really, really like that stuff. But the villains suck. The fight scenes felt so artificial, and there was just so much that didn't work for me here. A lot of the show felt rushed until the finale. The finale was actually solid, and I loved Bucky's arc here. He finally gets that, like, redemption arc. He comes to terms with everything that happened to him. He accepts it, and he is ready and willing to move on and make amends. So there are bits and pieces in here that really, really work, but I just don't ever care to go back to this show. Oh, also shout out to, I can't think of his name. whatever his name is, Kurt Russell's son, Wyatt Russell, I think it is. He was awesome in this series. He actually, you know what, just for him, I'm actually going to bump this up to good as gold, because he was just the perfect, the yin and yang balance here between like Bucky and Sam on one side, him on the other. He thinks he has good intentions, he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he takes it overboard. So yeah, because of that, I'll put it in good as gold. I'll bump it up ever so slightly. For Loki, I think I'm actually going to have to put Loki in the godlike tier. This will be a tough one. Or I guess, is this Loki? I have to scroll here, actually. This is... No, they didn't. I couldn't remember if it was Loki Season 1 and Season 2 separately, or Loki as a whole. Loki, the only show right now with 2 seasons in the MCU, and that second season pushed it past that awesome sauce category into the godlike category. So I think that I am going to say that Loki is godlike. No, maybe I can't. Comparing it to the rest that are up there, I don't think I can. Oh, it's a tough one, folks. It's a very, very, very tough one. So recency bias, I think, is playing a role here, because I was floored by the Loki Season 2 finale. So this is a tough one to move around, and I'm looking at it, and with all these other movies, I've had them for years. Some of them, like Captain America the First Avenger, has been out for like 12, 13 years. So I've had so many rewatches, so much time with that. So I think because of that, I have to bump Loki down to awesome sauce. But nevertheless, Loki, brilliant. Like, it's truly just phenomenal work, and I love the series. Both Season 1 and Season 2, they both had their issues, but I think in the end they balance each other out pretty perfectly. Like, I found the Loki Season 1 finale to be underwhelming, but I found the Loki Season 2 finale to be one of the best things that the MCU has done. So I think that there is a good balance there that makes the show very complete overall. Alright, we're moving into Black Widow now, and I don't really have much to say about this one. God, yeah, I'll put it in quite alright, only because of the supporting cast. I love David Harbour, I love Rachel Weisz, and of course, who doesn't love Florence Pugh? But the movie was just very much so too little too late. It feels like the writers and director forgot that Natasha isn't a super soldier. She survived ridiculous shit in here. The finale is just a gross looking CGI mess. They ruined Taskmaster, not because of the backstory stuff, but because of the way the character just barely has any involvement in the movie and really just has no personality, and Dreykov is a bottom tier villain. So the cast is really the only saving grace for this movie, in my opinion. What If will also, I'll put that in the good as gold. I think there are some really cool, fun ideas in here, and we'll see what Season 2 brings. Season 2 might bump this up a little bit more, but I just wish they took much more of an anthology approach. I really, going into this show, thought it was going to be each episode was its own individual thing. Like, it was going to be each episode on its own little island, its own self-contained episode, and we would just explore all these crazy scenarios. But instead, in typical MCU fashion, they had to make it like a shared universe of animated characters in these different realities and stuff. So I didn't care for that stuff a whole lot, but the individual stories, for the most part, I really, really enjoyed them, and I wish we got more self-contained stories, and maybe that's what Season 2 will be. Probably not, but yeah. Shang-Chi will also go in that awesome sauce category. Simu Liu, beautiful casting. Like, perfect, spot on, absolutely nailed it one again. The MCU's casting record is second to none. I love Tony Leung. People can finally stop complaining and bitching about the Mandarin twist, because here you go, you have the real Mandarin. I loved pretty much everything about this movie except for the finale. The weird flying mini dragon things, and then the giant dragon fight at the end. Like, it would have been so much better if the final fight was between Simu Liu and Tony Leung, the father, son. That was emotional. It had stakes. It had weight. That was just damn fine filmmaking. But they went and ruined it by making just a giant CGI monstrosity, and that was the final fight for me. That sucked. I didn't care for that. I would have preferred if they would have wrapped it up a different way. But the movie, it's beautiful. It has so many different little elements in it that really dives into the culture. You can see the director's fingerprints. His name is escaping me. It's like Daniel Creston, or the opposite. Anyway, his fingerprints are all over this movie. This movie has a very unique style. It's gorgeous to look at, so it has a lot of things really, really going for it, but it does just suffer from that finale and having way too much Trevor Slater. Like, that was them funny, poking it on the nose, being like, yeah, this we said this guy was the Mandarin, ha ha ha, but then he comes along for the rest of the adventure, and he becomes so annoying, and that pulled me out of the experience quite a bit. Eternals might get some flack for this one too, but I actually really enjoyed Eternals. I think it covered a large period of time very well. I loved how all of the characters had their own unique personalities, their own distinct powers. I like how Icarus turned on them. Makari is the best speedster ever put to film, and Makari is the MVP of the movie. And it's, I would say, probably the best looking MCU movie. It's one of the most well directed for sure, and it just has such a different tone, such a different look and different vibe that still has yet to be replicated in the MCU. No idea why people dislike this movie. I'll never get it because I love it. Well, not love it enough, but like it has its issues. It runs on a little long and certain things aren't great. You know, they definitely could have used the villain Crow a bit better and stuff. So it has its issues, but for the most part, I really enjoy it. Hawkeye will also go in good as gold. It's just a perfectly fine, serviceable, fun little Christmas adventure. The cast is the best part here. It was really cool having Vincent D'Onofrio back as Wilson Fisk, even though he definitely doesn't feel like the same Kingpin. It was our introduction to Echo, who's getting her own show that's going to be TVMA in the coming months. That's super exciting. I like seeing this far more human side of Jeremy Renner's Hawkeye, seeing that his back hurts and his shoulders hurt and that he's having hearing loss, and seeing him trying to balance his personal life, being a father, being a husband, with the work stuff, with being an Avenger. And then of course you have Kate Bishop. Haley Steinfeld in this one was a fan casting come true, and she fulfilled everyone's wishes and just was wonderful. Spider-Man No Way Home, Dodoy. I have a few little gripes with this one. The final act gets a bit too chaotic. It's hard to follow sometimes. They really did underutilize Lizard and Sandman, but for the most part, this movie was the Spider-Verse movie in live action. They could go even bigger in the next one. Who knows? The way things left off for Peter Parker's next stretch, perfect. Seeing Toby and Andrew again damn near had me crying. This is either my favorite or my second favorite theater going experience of all time. I went opening night, full packed, sold out crowd, people dressed up as Spider-Man left, right, and center, screaming, cheering. We knew that Daredevil was coming back, and there was so much good in here. It is fan service, the movie, but as a fan, I look to be serviced, and this movie did it and did it right. So I freaking love it. Moon Knight gets... Oh, I think I moved a little bit, sorry. Moon Knight gets too much flack. It's a damn good show. Yeah, I would say it's better than those two. I think Moon Knight's great. Suffers from issues like cutting away for whatever reason before awesome fight scenes happen. And then the finale, a little bit shaky. But Oscar Isaac, fan-freaking-tastic. Ethan Hawke, I think severely underrated villain. We got, I'm blanking on the actress's name, but Lila, the Scarlet Scarab. I hope to see more of her because she was kick-ass. She was a total badass. She was awesome. I want to see more of her. I loved the exploration of Egyptian mythos. The 5th episode of this show is it is definitely my favorite episode out of any of the MCU series, and it is one of the best things that the MCU has ever put out. So there's a lot good going for Moon Knight, and I really hope to see the character again, and I would love to see a season 2. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, controversial one. A lot of people like to shit on this movie for some reason. I don't get it. We get to see even more of Benedict Cumberbatch as Strange, who, again, another just... it's astounding how they've nailed so many casting decisions. Benedict Cumberbatch couldn't have picked anyone better to play Strange. I actually really love the turn that they took with Scarlet Witch here, making her the villain. With where WandaVision left off, it didn't seem as abrupt to me personally, and I really liked her as the villain. She was truly terrifying. America Chavez was a welcome new addition. I love Xochitl Gomez in the role. Can't wait to see her back. But the best and biggest thing that this movie has going for it is, of course, Sam Raimi's direction. You can see the scenes and the sequences where some studio meddling happened, but when it's just full, unflinching, relentless, unfiltered Raimi, you know it. Between the camera angles and the score from Elfman and the horror elements in there, that's what makes me love this movie so much, and it's such a damn good time. It's so much fun to watch. I love Multiverse of Madness. This good as gold here is getting really filled up. Miss Marvel, plain and simple. Iman Vellani, another, born to play the role. genuinely born to play the role. I love Kamala Khan. I love the family aspect. I love the cultural exploration aspect. All that stuff is what worked for me. It's the superhero stuff that didn't work quite as well. The first like 3 episodes of the show I thought were awesome. I thought were really, really good. They were solid and I was engaged. And then the back half, when we got into more of the actual superhero stuff and everything, is where it lost me. And then just like a very generic, goofy, childish finale is where it really kind of lost me on the tail end there. Thankfully, she was so much better and got so much of the spotlight in the Marvels because she is wonderful. Boop. Yeah, rock bottom. Love and Thunder is rock bottom of the MCU in my opinion. It is the absolute worst thing that they have done. And the thing that sucks is that I love Ragnarok so much. So I was looking forward to this movie so much. I loved Natalie Portman coming back. I loved that we got the almighty Thor from her. And I loved Christian Bale in the role. But we didn't get enough Christian Bale. The movie is far too goofy for its own good. Far too childish. It's purposefully cringy. And that doesn't work. It's like they took everything that we really liked about Ragnarok with its like more down-to-earth moments and its more heartfelt moments, cranked those down and took the goofy ass stuff and dialed those up to like 20 freaking 5, and the movie just goes way too goofy and way too over the top. I would have liked a more tonally consistent movie, something more in line with Ragnarok where you did have those darker moments. I wish we got so much more Bale. I mean, he's the god butcher and we don't see him butcher any gods. The best parts of the movie are the fight scenes that take place with them, like that moment on like his home base or whatever with like the black and white and stuff. That stuff was awesome. That was super artsy fartsy, super fun and very out there. I loved that stuff, but so much of this movie just doesn't work for me, and it's the bottom of the barrel. She-Hulk, people might disagree with this one. I had fun with a lot of She-Hulk. It lost me towards the end. I think Tatiana Maslany, another perfect casting choice. There I go, saying it again. I think she was awesome in the role. I don't think the show was anywhere near as bad as some would lead you to believe. I think that so many people went into this show knowing they were going to hate it, wanting to hate it, watching the trailer, saying that it looked bad, saying that it was going to be bad, and they just had all these preconceived notions of what the show was going to be, but it knew what it was. The writers knew what it was. They had the character constantly breaking the fourth wall. It didn't take itself too seriously. The only thing that sucked was the finale, and the finale sucked. And it would probably be up and quite alright if it wasn't for that finale, truth be told. Werewolf by Night could be an awesome sauce, but it's just a little too short, and it didn't have enough going for me, like not enough memorable characters, not too many things to harken back to. But what I loved is that Michael Giacchino is one of my all-time favorite film composers, so the fact that he got to make his directorial debut, the fact that this movie had so much artistic integrity, that you could tell that he had a vision, that's why I will not watch the in-color version, because Giacchino made this movie, wanted it to be black and white, it worked with the black and white, and I loved that like throwback, dark, black and white film era feel. Yeah, this movie's worth watching. It's definitely like a fun little Halloween treat that I would revisit often. Wakanda Forever, say what you want, call it, what was the people calling it again? Woke Panther or something like that, or Wakanda Forever. Shut up. Like, woke does not mean anything. It doesn't carry any weight. It's just what people use when it's something that they don't like. Wakanda Forever is kick-ass. It's a little long, for sure. But Namor, introduced flawlessly, fits right into the rogues and or anti-hero gallery. Shuri taking over the Black Panther and the lessons that she, taking over as the Black Panther and the lessons that she learned felt very natural. Felt it just, again, fit right in. Everything was just woven together perfectly. The return of some characters, introduction of new characters, the end credit scene setting up for the future. Everything in this movie just worked for me, aside from, like, the length. It's a little bit long, a little bit run-on, and some of the CGI is really rough around the edges. But for the most part, this movie is pretty freaking good, if you ask me. Quantumania, I'm actually going to put it in quite alright because I liked it a lot more than most people probably did, and I recognize that. The CGI is gross. Jonathan Majors, I know, in a lot of hot water right now, and deservedly so it seems, but his performance before all that came out in this movie, I really enjoyed. Again, the cast works well for me. The dynamic between Scott and Hope, Some people found it very controversial to recast Cassie Lang before this movie. I think that Catherine Newton was great here. I thought MODOK was hilarious. It looked so uncanny, but he made me laugh, and that is a win in my books. It just felt like the MCU trying to be Star Wars, so for everything that didn't work, there was something that I actually did enjoy, even if it was a little bit like guilty pleasure territory enjoy. Guardians 3, like I said, if Endgame and Infinity War were the perfect culmination of the MCU, Guardians 3 was the perfect culmination of James Gunn's Guardians, where every character left off. I would not complain if we never saw any of them ever again. It tied up all of their character arcs in the most touching, heartfelt way. This is a movie made with love, made with passion. That's not something you can say about most, if not any, of the other MCU movies, at least not the ones directed by James Gunn. You can tell that this cast, this crew, and Gunn, they work in perfect harmony. They understand each other. They know what they're doing. In this movie, it made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me cry a lot. It gave me so many memories that I'm going to look back on from the theater-going experience and for how much this movie impacted me. I was an emotional wreck, and it was perfect. It was flawless in many, many ways. I have little gripes here and there, sure, but for the most part, this is one to remember, folks. I love Guardians 3. The holiday special was fine. It was like a fun little holiday watch. Actually, it's probably better than those. It was a fun little holiday watch and really nothing more. It was the typical Guardian stuff where it was like, it had heart, and that's what made me enjoy it. Secret Invasion also getting plopped down on the rock bottom. I like some of the performances. I liked Emilia Clarke, Samuel L. Jackson, obviously. Ben Mendelsohn coming back, great, good, perfect. Olivia Colman was pretty solid in here too, but the show was so dull. It was so boring. It was lacking any direction. It was lacking anything even remotely creative or interesting, and the finale has to be one of the worst things that they have ever done. So, yeah, super easily, very simple decision to put Secret Invasion in the very bottom. The Marvels, I'm actually going to put this in good as gold. A lot of people might hate me for this one, might come after me for that one. Go for it. Aside from the villain not really being all that good, definitely not the worst villain in the MCU. Like, you're crazy if you think she was the worst villain in the MCU. Like, I genuinely think that you are just objectively wrong, and I never say that. Like, film is subjective, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but she is not the worst villain. When you have villains like Crow from Eternals, when you have villains like the ones like Marvel or whatever from Captain Marvel, when you have villains like Malekith, when you have villains like, what was the other one that I was thinking of that was also just absolutely atrocious? I'm looking through like the list now. Like some of the villains in Ant-Man and the Wasp, when you have villains like Dreykov from Black Widow, she is not the worst villain in the MCU. Some of the visuals, they're hit or miss. Moments of this movie are stunning, and moments of this movie are pretty ugly. But the main reason to go and see this is that the lead trio is what I'm trying to say here. Not only do they have impeccable chemistry and great timing, they play off of each other very well. Their stories are believable, and they own these characters. I did do a 60-second short review on the Marvels. If you want to check that out, shameless plug. For just a bit more detail, a bit more context on my quick rundown here, because I'm sure I had a few other gripes with this movie that I'm not necessarily thinking of off the top of my head, but really, when I look back on this movie, I had fun. I think that the action is a ton of fun. I think that the lead trio is awesome. They're wonderful. They work so well together, and that is what I'll remember about the Marvels, and that is what I enjoyed so much about the Marvels. And now, as promised, my ranking, and I'm going to be short and sweet with it, folks, as best as I can be anyway. So Endgame is definitely my number one, like by a good fair bit. Endgame, my favorite theatrical experience of all time, I would say. So that's going there. Civil War, very, very close second for me. This is where it gets tricky. I'd probably put Infinity War, swap those. I'd probably put Infinity War here, Civil War there. The first Avengers definitely does still carry a lot of weight for me, though, too. But I'd probably go Winter Soldier there. I'd probably go the first Avengers there. I'd honestly probably Winter Soldier there. Then Guardians 3 because, that movie, it could be recency bias, but I've seen it a couple times now, and it's still definitely holding that spot. I'd probably put I think Iron Man is just on the cusp there. Probably look something like this for the top tier. So again, where Endgame is now, that would be number one. You'd work your way down to, 2, 3, 4, 5 would be here, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, wow. Perfect top 10 right there. That worked out really well somehow. And then this would be 11 and so on. So 11 for me would probably be Age of Ultron, which like a lot of people are definitely going to disagree with, but I love Age of Ultron. Then probably Iron Man 3. Oh, it's tough after that. First Avenger would probably sit in that spot afterwards. Black Panther, I'll move back a little bit. I think I don't know which one I like a bit better. Actually, I think I like Wakanda Forever better, which a lot of people are going to shit on me for that one, but I loved Wakanda Forever, folks. I probably, because Loki had the better season 2 finale and felt like a more complete story, I'll put Loki there. I'll put probably like this, Shang-Chi. I think Shang-Chi, you know what? I might have actually liked Multiverse. No, yeah, I probably like Multiverse of Madness a little bit more than Shang-Chi. Then Wakanda Forever was probably better than these, and Black Panther was better than these. So probably looks like that for the awesome sauce category. Again, this is very ad hoc. I might look back at this and be like, what the hell was I thinking? Which does happen often, actually, more than you'd probably think. This is where it's going to start getting a bit muddled for me, because a lot of these good as gold ones, they all kind of just blend together. I'd probably put Guardians 3 here, then Far From Home, then Homecoming. Ant-Man would get bumped to the back. I probably enjoyed the Marvels more than I enjoyed the first Ant-Man, not gonna lie. Werewolf by Night did definitely have that artisticness to it. I definitely liked Ant-Man more than this. Miss Marvel's probably at the back. Eternals, Hawkeye, I really didn't love. A lot of people loved Hawkeye. I didn't love Hawkeye. I thought it was just okay. What If was probably just slightly better than those two. Falcon and the Winter Soldier, probably a bit better than Ant-Man. Werewolf by Night was awesome. Probably look something like that. Oops, swap Doctor Strange back. Probably look like that for good as gold if I was to rank it right now. They're quite all right. Black Widow is like just on the cusp. I prefer Quantumania. When I just recently did when I did my ranking when the Ant-Man Quantumania came out, I did put the first Ant-Man in second and Quantumania in first. But after a lot of reflection, that's probably not the case anymore. At least the first Ant-Man, again, feels like its own self-contained thing. Doesn't feel like so much of like an imposter syndrome kind of thing. And it's more just like traditionally funny and probably makes me laugh a bit harder. So probably what I do there. Iron Man 2 would definitely go there. Yeah, it would probably look something like this. Actually, you know what? No, it would probably be like this a little bit more accurately. And now onto the super meh. Thor is just barely out of rock bottom for me. It would probably look exactly like this, and then the very bottom would be, so that would mean that Love and Thunder is in that very last place spot, with Endgame being in that very first place spot. So I think that just about does it. Those were the tiers that I decided on for each of these projects, and that is my, for now, final ranking. So of course, we'll ship it back off to me on the green screen. Alrighty folks, so if the end was a little too quick for you all to actually fully take in my complete ranking, here it is now, should be popping up on your screen, and if I wasn't super lazy, they will be numbered 1 to 44, and that is my complete ranking. And so that is all for today's video, folks. Be sure to let me know down in the comments below if you agree or disagree with which tier each movie and or show ended up in. While you're at it, if you're feeling super ambitious, don't forget to let me know which tier you would have put each of the MCU projects in. If that's far too much, which is completely understandable, let me know your top 10, top 5, top 3, or even your favorites or favorites and least favorites. Whatever floats your boat, drop it down in the comments below. If you're a movie lover whatsoever, then my channel is the place to be for you. Be it tier videos like this one, ranking videos, versus videos, top 10 videos, I have it all and so much more on the channel, with plenty of stuff happening behind the scenes that will be revealed soon. Not to mention there are well over 1,000 videos currently on the channel for you to enjoy. So if you enjoyed this particular video, then be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And if any of that sounds like it's right for you and you want to see more from me, then smash that subscribe button right now. While you're at it, don't forget to ring that little bell icon. That way you can be notified about all of my latest uploads. And as always, stay safe. Thank you so much for watching. And that's a wrap. Hey you, yeah you, if you made it this far, just know I appreciate you, and while you're here, consider hitting that subscribe button.